On the 21st of October 2017, Ollie Davis was pronounced dead at just 4 weeks old. Despite having no visible injuries, a post-mortem examination soon uncovered one of the worst cases of child abuse the East Midlands in the UK has ever seen. Ollie suffered 40 broken bones and a series of brain injuries after a horrendous campaign of abuse at the hands of his parents. And those parents managed to evade justice for over 6 years. This is the tragic and unforgivable case of Ollie Davis. Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. Thank you for joining me. Today's case is truly horrific in nature. It is about child abuse and death. And one of the reasons you know that I cover these cases is my background is in child safeguarding. I spent 2 decades protecting children. I take that very, very seriously. And whenever there is a failure to protect, and more we hear about failures to protect children, I cannot help but be interested in finding out more. This case took a long time to bring to court. The perpetrators got away with it for a very long time, which is just astonishingly awful, because these kind of people with this kind of propensity are a danger to our society. I think what is challenging about this case is obviously that it involves child abuse, but it's also the age of the individual that we're discussing. Ollie was 4 weeks of age. That's all he got on this planet. 4 weeks. It is just devastating to imagine that a child that would have been so wanted by millions of other people who can't have children themselves, people who are looking to adopt children, people out there who just have so much love to give. And yet somehow these individuals are gifted with this miracle of life, only to dispose of it in the most gruesome and brutal of ways. If you are new to my channel, by the way, I do deep dive crime content twice a week on a Wednesday and a Sunday. Crime and consistency is my catchphrase. If you like to know what's happening to you on a daily basis, this is definitely the channel for you. I am throwing out some more cases now and then, trying to do more content, but you will always get my cases, same time, same place, every single week. That is an absolute commitment I have to you. Also, before we kick off with today's case, my merch, my Don't Fuck With Cats merch. I do love this. For those of you who might not have seen this before, that is actually my cat Chase in the picture. So it's very personal. Also, thanks to everybody who keeps getting in touch saying that you've received one of these and the quality is awesome. It is. You will not get this quality hoodie anywhere for the price that we sell it, because we believe in giving you quality and we believe that you guys deserve only the best. Let's get on with today's utterly tragic case. The parents and the perpetrators in this case are Michael Davis, who is the father, he's 29, and Kayleigh Driver, who's the mother, she is 31. They lived in Upper Temple Walk, Beaumont, Leicester. I would say it's a pretty rundown area, if I'm honest. There's quite a lot of deprivation there. And they lived with Driver's mother, Mandy Bolton, also her stepfather, Peter, and her half-sister, Georgia. So a relatively busy household with adults all living together. But we have to remember as well, where the parents are concerned, that means that they had support around them. And believe me, her family were supportive. It's not as if they could not have gained the help that they required to look after Ollie. It's not as if there weren't people around them who would have been able to help out had Ollie required that help. And it's really important headlining that, because what we're talking about is the abandonment of care and the failure of care of this gorgeous little baby Ollie, when actually there were people who could have stepped in if there was a problem. Now, this couple had one child together, Ollie Davis, and Davis and Driver were actually not together when Driver found out that she was pregnant. So ultimately, she already has children. She discovers now that she's carrying Davis's child, and she was living with a new boyfriend at this time. Now, again, I'm not going to sound super judgy, but I'm going to come across as a little bit judgy with respect, because just consider this. You've been in a relationship with a guy. You've managed to get pregnant to that guy. By the time you discover that pregnancy, and that's going to be early on, she's had babies before. She's actually living with a new boyfriend. I mean, I don't know. It sparks and speaks of a very emotional, immature mindset. And that will play out a little bit further down the line, because certainly we know that Driver has some developmental issues herself. But It speaks of somebody who acts in a relatively rash manner and means that she isn't necessarily the most consequential thinker. So she's living with this new guy at the time. But once she finds out that she's pregnant, she rekindles the relationship with Davis. They get back together because they've got this idea about supporting their new baby. I find that quite odd. If you're in a situation where you're pregnant and you've actually separated from the partner that got you pregnant and you're living with somebody new, then surely your emotions are going to be with the person that you've met, not with the ex. But it seems that the idea of having a baby means that these two decide, even though it's broken down before, that maybe they'll have the best shot at it by bringing a baby into the picture. And that is the recipe for any disaster, isn't it? When it comes down to it, if you've already failed in your relationship, the idea that a baby is going to heal it is ludicrous. Babies bring a lot of stress and a lot of expense. They aren't going to help heal fractures. They're just going to exacerbate and amplify them more. But that's what they do. So Ollie is eventually born on the 21st of September 2017. Then we get to the horrendous morning of the 21st of October 2017. This is when emergency services get the call to the family home because the parents of Ollie have found him unresponsive in his cot. He's just 4 weeks old. Now, this is usually a time where babies are just absolutely being cradled in the bosom of their family. A baby doesn't do very much, but to those who are around them, to those who love them, to those who are in their primary care scenario with them, it tends to be a genuine honeymoon period. Yes, you might be tired. Yes, your child is something you're adapting to, but it's just a joyful experience, a real honeymoon period where everything that your child does, even though they only rarely open their eyes and do things like occasionally yawn, you just think it's the most incredible, intoxicating thing that you're ever going to experience. So that's where you usually are. You don't expect a 4-week-old to die because understandably child death is very, very rare. And most importantly, you don't expect a child to die at 4 weeks old when there hasn't been a prelude to this situation occurring. So you do get children who are very sick and therefore they lose their life, and that is terrible. But there's not been any prelude. To all intents and purposes, Ollie has been okay. So at this point, he's rushed to Leicester Royal Infirmary. Obviously, this is in an ambulance with the correct staff. And the medical staff are desperately trying to revive him. They're desperately trying to help him. But really sadly, at 7:30 a.m, Ollie is pronounced dead. Now, when they're looking at him, there are no obvious signs of injury. There's no obvious signs of illness to account for his sudden death. So understandably, when it is a death that's happened and people haven't got an explanation for it, they need to do a medical investigation. And that medical investigation reveals some really harrowing evidence, the true extent, essentially, of Ollie's injuries. They do the post-mortem on his body, and it turns out that he'd actually died from the delayed effects of a broken neck. It's devastating to even speak those words. We're talking about a beautiful 4-week-old baby. And apparently he's not a fussy baby. He's not a baby who cries a great deal. This is not a baby who's introducing a high stress reaction in the household. And that's according to the people who lived in that household. And yet this child has died of a delayed effect of a broken neck. They believe that that broken neck occurred up to 8 days before his death. So that injury had basically led to the compression of the spinal cord, which ultimately caused Ollie to stop breathing. He's 4 weeks of age. They also harrowingly discovered a total of 40 bone fractures. Those bone fractures included a fractured skull, collarbones, breaks to joints in both arms and legs, and 23 rib fractures. I am sure some of you have had rib fractures. They are agonising. I myself have had to have an operation where a part of my rib has been used, and that means that I have had to have a part of my rib removed. Oh, it was so painful. I've also had a broken rib in an accident. Again, it felt so painful to breathe in. The idea that that child has 23 rib fractures is beyond belief. The agony that baby would be enduring, breathing in and out, would be inconceivable, incomprehensible, and impossible to relate to for most of us because it would be an intolerable agony. Now, when it comes down to the arrests, they initially happen quite quickly because when there is a death of a child and the results come back where clearly there has been a horrific abandoning of care, the parents are going to be in the line of fire. So finally, after the post-mortem case is handed to the specialist detectives from the East Midlands Special Operations Unit, which is the murder investigation team, particularly in this case, they basically go and arrest them. So following the post-mortem, once these results are out, clearly they know that they're not dealing with a child who's just died of natural causes. So they pass the case to the specialist detectives from the East Midlands Special Operations Unit, the murder investigation team there, of course. And then they arrest Davis, who's 22 at the time, and Driver, who's 24 at the time, on the 27th of October 2017. Now, they were both interviewed, as we would expect, separately by the police. And it really disturbs me watching the police interview. Davis looks very nervous, I will note that. Throughout the whole interview, he does not look happy, but he just acts like he has no idea what's happened. Long story short is he says, I've got no explanation for why my son's death. I just know I didn't do anything to him.
What has potentially killed him is a very serious injury to his spine. His neck bones have been broken. I don't know. Do you know that you have, like, the called vertebrae at the back?
Oh, yeah.
Each vertebrae is numbered, isn't it? And what we're told from the post-mortem is that let me get this right, the
C4, 5.
The C4 and 5 vertebrae have broke effectively. They've come apart. Effectively your neck bones. Yeah. And if that happens, then 9 times out of 10 it will lead to death. And at this stage, that's how we think. Can't say we know, that's how we think Ollie has died. His neck is broke. What do you think of that?
Don't know. We'll see. Not sure about obviously how it's happened really. We'll see. Obviously, put him down to sleep. He was fine. He seemed fine when he was sleeping. Wasn't acting any differently. Or just peaceful, nice.
Well, shoulder bone, which is called a clavicle. It was fractured, i.e. broken. And also his right humerus, which is his arm bone. This bone here. Fractured. So we've got a fracture here, and we've got a fracture here. Okay? It's been broken. Can you explain how that might have happened?
No, don't. I've got any sort of idea of how it's happened or. No.
Is that a shock to you at all?
Yeah.
My first question to you is, how do you account for these injuries on Ollie?
I was not really sure how he even got anything because I didn't even know there was any injuries or anything because he seemed fine, everything looked fine. Obviously, when obviously he did fall asleep at around 3ish, obviously when I told you some policewoman that came to the hospital, he seemed fine. He fell asleep and he looked normal.
So I know that we've disclosed some of the injuries that we found on Ollie. Are you saying to me, just to clarify, that you don't have an explanation for me?
No.
Okay.
Quite shocked by them, to be honest. Obviously didn't expect.
Okay. Yeah. And now, before I answer the questions, I will come back to that original question, knowing what potentially the injuries are.
Yep.
Can you explain or account for them?
No.
No,
No.
not at all. Okay.
Think about losing your 4-week-old baby and then being put in the line of fire for his murder. You are going to have a range of emotions in that moment. For example, you might feel absolutely incensed. You can't believe how dare they are accusing you of harming your child that you love. It may be that you're absolutely brokenhearted. You've lost your child. To even talk about the loss of your child brings you to tears and you just can't contain yourself. You can't retain your composure. You might be in a situation where you're just in disbelief. You're very rarely going to find an individual that comes across, yes, a little bit nervous, but very disassociated from what's really playing out. Just can't explain why he's dead, doesn't understand what's happened. Just this severe lack of emotion. Considering Ollie's died just 6 days earlier, for most of us, we would be struggling to even get out of bed, let alone sit in a police interview. Now, the police at this point tell him that Ollie's C4 and 5 vertebrae had been broken and that this had led to his death. Davies simply said that he didn't know what had happened. He said that Ollie had been sleeping peacefully, and he actually said, quote, "We will see how it happened. He seemed fine when he was sleeping. He wasn't acting any differently." So immediately he's saying, "I don't know how this has played out. All I know is that I've had nothing to do with it and my child looked fine." The detective in the interview then starts to list some of Ollie's injuries, and they're awful. So a broken clavicle, his right arm was broken. And as he goes through the list, basically Davis says that he can't explain any of them. He said, "I'm quite shocked by them, to be honest." I mean, again, it's such an underplaying of reality. I'm quite shocked by them, to be honest. You'd be far more likely to be like, this is ridiculous. There's absolutely no way that my child could have endured these kind of injuries without me knowing. I don't get it. I don't understand it. You know, if you really didn't know where these injuries were from and you've been around your baby, you'd be aware that they were looking at you as a potential suspect and you'd be denying it vehemently, but also adding in that you don't get it, you don't understand, as opposed to just mildly saying, "Oh, it's kind of quite a surprise to me." It just speaks of somebody who doesn't have the emotional cogency and capacity to really act in a way that's according to what you'd expect in this moment when it comes down to all these injuries. Now, similar to Davis's interview, Driver, the mother in this, doesn't explain how her son had so many injuries at the time of his death. She, again, just acts like she's not got a clue. So at this point, they highlight how awful Ollie's injuries were, the fact that they were all over the right side of his body. And she basically says, "Listen, I've never seen Davis lose his temper with Ollie." So she's sidestepping there, isn't she? She's basically saying, "Well, I haven't done it, but equally, I've never seen my partner do it either."
So to Ollie's humours.
You can't really call where could have got that from. Unless it's obviously when, like I said, when my son fell onto him. But
Okay, so you don't know how
no,
he's got
no,
that injury.
no.
Okay. Also up here, along here,
Yeah,
is a bone called the collarbone.
Yeah.
To give it its medical name, it's the clavicle.
Yeah.
Okay, it's a bone up here. And that's also got a fracture in it. You know how can you account for how Ollie got that injury?
no. Can't recall anything. No.
Okay. The biggest bone in your leg, so the bone that runs from your hip to your knee,
Yeah.
is called your femur. Okay. That has also got a fracture to it. And that the right side. So all these injuries I'm pointing to are on the right hand side. So the right arm, right collarbone, and right femur. Okay.
Can't really. Because the only time I ever when I put him down, I put him down so smoothly. I can't think of anything that could have done that.
Okay.
No.
Is there any way that you could have caused those injuries?
Only by rocking him but smoothly. That's the only. But no.
Have you ever dropped Ollie
No.
by accident?
No.
Or has he ever fallen off the bed? Or has he fallen out of your arms?
My The only belly they've really been on is George's. Because he catches the bus to work.
Have you ever seen him lose his temper with Ollie?
No.
Have you ever lost your temper with Ollie?
No.
Has anyone in that house ever lost their temper with Ollie?
Not that I've seen.
Has anyone in that house ever done anything to Ollie that isn't right?
No. I've seen.
You've seen.
No.
Has anyone done anything to Ollie in that house that could explain why he's got a fractured leg, fractured arm, fractured collarbone, a neck injury?
Not that I've seen.
But to be honest, that's irrelevant anyway, because lots of predators will be abusive towards a child when they're on their own with them. You don't need your partner to be aware of your harm. Sometimes we see partners get involved, but a lot of the time, a perpetrator will abuse a victim when they're on their own with them, because it gives them a permission base to do so. No one's watching. Now, during the interviews, both Davis and Driver just refused to explain all his injuries. So the problem they've got there is they don't know who to charge, do they? Is it Davis? Is it Driver? Is it both of them? So because neither of them are giving an explanation as to why Ollie's been so seriously injured, they both get released from custody. So then the police have got a real investigation ahead of themselves because no one's saying anything. So it's a very lengthy, a very complex investigation. Medical experts were just brought in from every area. And I have to say, when you look at police investigations and they want to make sure that justice is done, this kind of case really just example great police work, great expert work. So they brought these investigators on a medical level to look at Ollie in great detail. And they established that the fractures he sustained couldn't have been accidental and they must have been caused by serious physical abuse. So the nature of the injuries revealed that they were basically caused by inflicting harm in very different ways. So this isn't one incident, this is numerous incidents, and the way that this child has been essentially tortured has differed. So the person, the perpetrator, has used different methods. Now, the police did find that a health visitor had actually seen Ollie only 2 days before his death. They apparently watched him whilst he was being chained. They didn't see any swelling, didn't see any bruises. Also, they didn't notice a fracture to his neck either. Now, Detective Constable Natasha Batstone, she was involved in the case from 2018 onwards, she said it really wasn't surprising that the health visitor didn't have any concerns. He was crying as he was being changed, but clearly the health visitor's looking and thinking, well, that's normal for a baby when they're getting changed. A lot of babies, when they're being undressed, get upset. Also, paediatric doctors and police attended the hospital to carry out an examination on Ollie, and even at that stage, those injuries were not actually identified. So it wasn't easy to spot. They weren't obvious physical marks, or the body didn't look contorted in a way that would make you think that there were some serious injuries that had occurred. However, neighbours, they tell a different story about what was going on in that household. So neighbours from Upper Temple Walk, Leicester, they talked about Ollie's parents really negatively. So their next door neighbour, Robin Smith, said they were horrendous. They were just disgusting tramps. The house stunk. They had 19 cats. And don't get me wrong, those of you who watch my channel know I basically am an animal hoarder in the most positive of ways. I have a lot of animals. They're all looked after. My house is clean and it doesn't smell. Because as a responsible animal owner, you can have a lot of animals, and as long as you feed them well, make sure that the toilets are looked after, take them out on walks if you've got dogs, you've not got a problem. But if you happen to be very lazy and have a lot of animals, then it's a recipe for disaster. But the neighbours do not speak, shall we say, positively about this family. They also said we had to put up privacy glass because they used to watch us out of the window. They said that the family had only lived on the street for 3 years, yet had managed to alienate some of their neighbours. Now, with respect, it's subjective, isn't it? We can live on an estate, we can get on with some of our neighbours, and we can really not get on with others. It depends on the relationship that you have. I'm only giving you the information that has been stated through the research that I've done, and clearly that doesn't suggest that it's an absolute honest account. It's just one person's opinion, or on this occasion, a few people's different opinions about this family. Now, the neighbour who lived across the street, who was anonymous in this, they said that after Davis and Driver were arrested, they basically fled the area and moved house almost immediately. That's unsurprising. Let's just say, in a lot of areas, You aren't going to be looked at very kindly if people believe that you have murdered your child or had anything to do with the death of your child. Also, it's worth noting that one of the things that I find absolutely disgusting is that Davis, the father in this case, decided after Ollie had died to set up some kind of charity fundraiser for SANS, which is when a child has died of something like cot death. And clearly these organisations exist because people go through the harrowing loss of children and the grief that they have to deal with after. And yet he puts up this fundraiser. And the reason for that is because he wants to look innocent. He's trying to say he cares as a father. I'm really caring. That's why I've got this fundraiser. But really, it's deflection. It's about saying, I want to look innocent. Only an innocent person would raise money to care about the child that they've lost. And that's just absolute BS. Guilty people do that all the time. Now, like I said, this investigation takes a long time. And ultimately, Davis is interviewed about Ollie's death 3 years later. Now, 3 years is a long time. And I imagine that both the parents in this case are probably thinking, well, you know what? They probably haven't got that much on us because at the end of the day, years have passed and arguably they're letting us walk around the streets. So if they really think we're murderers, would they allow that to happen? And I imagine there'll be a small amount of confidence growing that they aren't going to have to face the repercussions of their sins. And when he is interviewed again, of course, he reaffirms that he's got no responsibility for the death of his child. He has no idea what happened to him. Isn't it amazing that these parents can live in a home with a child that they brought into the world and this child dies in the most heinous of ways, but they have no idea what could have happened? What could have happened?
Are you responsible for the death of your child?
No.
Do you know who is responsible?
No.
Did you or anyone else cause any injury to Ollie that I'm going to discuss with you today?
I don't know, not me.
Specifically, you said at no point during that night or at any point have you ever manhandled or mistreated Ollie. Is that right, Michael?
Yeah, never done anything to him.
Not even accidentally or unintentionally, I should say, in changing him, in clothing him?
No.
You're shaking your head. I just want to be clear on that.
I'm shaking my head, yeah. No.
Now, for any parent who's responsible, you know if your child's injured. For any parent who's loving, you know when your child is in distress. It's as simple as that. So the very fact that these parents are both claiming that they have no idea, no knowledge, no understanding, that shows a lack of capacity and capability as parents, full stop, or an avoidance with the truth. I would argue both of those to some degree. Now, when asked if he had injured Ollie, Davis replied, I don't know, not me. So he's basically saying, are you the person responsible? He goes, no, absolutely not. But he's not saying that he doesn't think somebody else is. And he's leaving it open, isn't it, for the possibility that somebody else could have actually injured his son. Now we get to October 2021. This is after 4 years of gathering evidence. Finally, Davis and Driver are charged in connection with Ollie's death and of causing the multitude of other injuries that he sustained. Because you have to remember, these were protracted and sustained for that 4-week period to literally receive the equivalent of 10 bad injuries every single week because of the amount of injuries that were on that little boy's body. It is blindsiding. Now, there were delays to the trial because we all know that thing called COVID happened, and that puts things back. But Detective Inspector Mark Parrish, he gets involved in the case in 2022. He said it took more than 6 years after Ollie's death to bring his parents to trial because it was very complex on a medical basis. So that complex medical investigation required all these multiple experts in different fields across the country and overseas to ensure that they got the right information to build a case so the CPS could say, yes, we can take these individuals to trial. So it took a very long time to establish that Ollie's injuries were not caused during his birth or as a result of a medical issue. And that's really important. We have to be honest, you are innocent until proven guilty. And if it had been that Davis and Driver were just very unlucky and that Ollie had some actual fundamental core issues to his physiology and that could be evidenced, you'd want that, because even though it looks terrible on paper to see all these injuries, occasionally it can be that a baby is born with a condition where their bones, for example, break very easily And parents have gone to prison when experts haven't been brought in who can discount that it's abuse and evidence that it's actually to do with the condition. So it's really good that they've taken all of this time because they want to absolutely ensure that when it goes to court, there can be absolutely no stone unturned, that every single dot has been dotted I-wise and every single T has been crossed T-wise. You want to make absolutely 100% sure that these individuals are responsible, otherwise it would be a miscarriage of justice. Now, after Davis and Driver are charged in 2021, it still takes 2 years to get to court. So the complexity of the case meant more lengthy examinations of Ollie's body had to basically take place. And of course, the defence experts, they have to review the investigation. So that means that they then have to find and consult more experts because, of course, the defence experts can't be the same as the prosecution experts. And it's not as if these particular type of experts are everywhere. It's a very complex area where medical investigations are concerned. And people tend to be at the top of their game. And that's why they're being brought into court. And essentially, you want somebody on a level with the person being brought into the court for the prosecution as the defence. You don't want to make sure that the prosecution have a much more solid case because they've got better experts than you. So that takes a lot of time. Then we have the wonderful COVID pandemic that adds to delays, particularly because some of the experts actually had to be found overseas and they weren't letting you fly, were they? Everybody was being put into these weird situations where we were all quarantined and people couldn't leave their homes and it was a whole heap of horror. But essentially, that's why that needed to be put back because they needed to get the best experts so the defence could compare with the prosecution. Now, the trial was initially meant to start in February 2023, but because Driver, who's the mother in this case, had lots of health issues and she also has multiple sclerosis, that meant there were more delays. So the trial eventually gets underway on the 17th of January 2024, so a really recent case. In the trial, the judge presiding over it was Mr. Justice Cotter. The prosecution was John Hankin, and Davis and Driver were actually tried at the same time. The trial was a big one. It lasted 10 weeks, which we'd expect because there is so much expert testimony. Now, when it came down to the prosecution's case, they did have a bit of an issue. There was a basic unique challenge to some degree because neither defendant blamed the other, but both of them said it wasn't me. Now, that's difficult because how can you evidence that one party is to blame, or indeed both parties are to blame, when neither has bent or folded on the other, essentially? So it's up to the prosecution at this point to present evidence to determine both defendants' respective parts in Ollie's death. So are they saying they're both jointly responsible? Are they deciding that one party is more responsible than the other? And if so, how can they prove that? Now, the defendants were each charged with murder, but they were also given an alternative charge of causing or allowing the death of a child, and that's important. It's important because it ensures that the jury can either find Davis or Driver criminally responsible, even if they didn't cause his injuries directly. So that's why that twofold option is there. Now, during the court case, the jury has shown interview footage of Davis and Driver, and I think that's really powerful because anybody sat on the jury will have had experience with children and babies. Even if you haven't had physically a child yourself, you'll have had experience with them. And you therefore know that there is an expectation of how you will act if you have lost a child, even if that child is not yours. If somebody close to you loses a child, you would be distraught. And if you're talking about it, there will be a level of expectation regarding your emotional vocabulary. You'll be distressed, you'll be crying, you'll be despondent and numb, but completely lost and forlorn. You won't be what I would consider is ambivalent and unfussed. Generally, there's no sign of Davis and Driver showing any emotion. There's no sign of them showing any remorse, because if your child has died and you're innocent, you've done absolutely nothing wrong, I guarantee for the most part, you will have been bargaining with God as that child is being dealt with by emergency services, saying, please take me, do anything, I want to die instead of this child. And then when you ultimately lose your child, you'll be thinking, what the hell did I do? What should I have done better? It's not because you should have done anything. It's not because you did anything wrong. It's because ultimately the feeling within you is, oh my God, my child is dead. I must have failed them. None of that. In fact, they're casually sipping water, they're shrugging the shoulders. Driver even yawns while she's being interviewed by the detectives. Sorry, am I boring you? Whilst talking about the death of your child who's succumbed to enormous injuries. And the reason this is a problem is because it shows a complete lack of regard for the child. If you're in a situation where you absolutely know you did nothing to your baby, and you are sitting there being interviewed by the police who are listing the horrific injuries that your baby, your beloved baby, has succumbed to, and you know the only other person who's had access to that baby is your partner, you are going to be sitting there thinking, when do I get access to the voodoo dolls and the bloody pins, because I am going to stab that voodoo doll up really severely. I'm not saying that I practice voodoo. I'm just saying in my head during that experience, that's what I think I'd do. The truth is, I have a little girl. She's 9 months of age. I live for her like I have for my children. If, God, to some horrific scenario, I lost this baby, one, I would be a crumpled mess forever. Two, if somebody said, we believe that your husband has killed her, well, he better hope to be locked up for the rest of his life. Genuinely, he better hope. And it won't just be me coming for him. There'll be a whole list of people, probably including some of you, coming for him. Because that's how we feel when we are told that our child has been absolutely abandoned on a care level and essentially murdered. And the fact that neither of them do that, I find that deeply suspect. I really do. I find it deeply suspect. So a lot of the things the jury are being shown are showing that they're not acting and reacting how they would be expected psychologically, emotionally, and familially to actually act. Then they bring in the experts and they are powerful. So we've got Dr. Hamilton, who's a forensic pathologist. He talks about the fact that Ollie had sustained a total of 40 fractures, so 10 fractures essentially for every week he was alive. He also suffered the horrendous brain injuries. He had bleeding over the surface of his brain. Hankin, for the prosecution, said that Ollie was subjected to serious physical abuse, most likely to have taken place during the last 10 days of his life. Ollie's injuries were compared to those usually seen after a high-energy car crash. Professor Mangum was an expert they brought in to testify. He's a musculoskeletal pathologist of 30 years, so absolutely a very credible expert. He frequently provides expert reports in child deaths, so also very specific. The fact that he has a lot of experience where child deaths are concerned, that's really important. He said he had, quote, never seen fracturing as extensive as in Ollie's case. 30 years, child expert, never had seen fracturing as extensive as in Ollie's case. Horrible to even envisage that we're talking about a case that this man who's died in the wool as an expert, and this is a first for him. He said to cause Ollie's neck injuries required more than just shaking. His neck was forced back beyond its normal limits, and severe force was needed. Can you just imagine the agony of that child? So you're talking about his chin being pushed back and his head being pushed back, and that's what caused the injury. He said the displaced fracture of Ollie's right collarbone was caused between 4 and 8 days before his death. So the agony he had been enduring on a day-to-day basis is just horrific. And he stated that the degree of force required to cause that particular fracture was very significant. He said it's a really, even in babies, single strong bone. It's much stronger than a rib, for example. And he said that that particular injury had happened through direct impact or as part of a very severe twisting motion of the right arm. So this person who's doing it is just doing this incredibly forceful twisting and pushing, and the idea that we're talking about a 4-week-old baby and this adult is causing this kind of grievous harm to this child. Then Dr. Robinson's called in. He's an experienced paediatrician in a very large hospital. He's got an expertise in child protection, forensic medicine, so again, very well placed. He again said this was the most severe case he'd ever encountered. And it was noted that Ollie had suffered 23 rib fractures, and apart from one, he said they were all caused by severe compressive force, so squeezing really hard. He also said that 21 of the fractures were caused between 4 to 10 days before Ollie's death. So we're just getting this picture of the agony this child would have endured before he died. He said that these fractures had either been caused at once or over multiple occasions. And Dr. Robinson said that if these 21 fractures were caused on one occasion, it would be double the number he had previously encountered in any child protection work. Double. He said that Ollie would have been unbelievably distressed, would have been in absolute significant pain, would have struggled breathing, and would have had incredible pain during the first 3 days in particular. There were also 3 fractures to the left front rib, and they were all put in the time frame that Ollie was in Davis's care. So either at the time of his death or just before his death. So they kind of pinpoint that Davis would have been the one to carry out that particular injury. Also, and this just is devastating, and I find myself just drawing in breath before I say this because I know how it's going to affect a lot of you, because it just feels so inconceivably cruel and distinct to what I've just been talking about. And what I've just been talking about is horrific enough. So the medical examiners also found an injury to the frenulum, and that's possibly caused by the forceful insertion of a bottle. Now, the frenulum is where the foreskin meets the underside of the penis. It looks like a small V just below the head, and usually it's the part that remains after circumcision. It's very, very sensitive, but the idea that a bottle has caused that particular injury is just too cruel to mention, and it's sexually sadistic as well. Now, every single one of the experts said they were certain that all his injuries were caused by Davis, not Driver. I would imagine they've come to that conclusion based on how often Davis was around the baby as opposed to Driver, and when he was linked to certain injuries. And that's why they pinpoint that he's the issue. Also, I would imagine that because Driver has had prior children and none of those children have reported these kind of issues, that could also potentially be why they've come to that conclusion. But it is just an assumption. Let's be honest, Driver could absolutely have been involved, as well as Davis, in that direct abuse. Now, when we look at the timeline of Ollie's injuries, Dr. Robinson said it was clear that his injuries were caused on multiple occasions. At least 5 different mechanisms were actually required to cause the range of injuries. So first of all, a blow to the skull, a broken neck, compression of the ribs, twisting of the humeral fracture, pulling and twisting to cause growth plate fractures. These are just the injuries that were, shall we say, the main ones that were coming to fruition when they were looking at the reports of Ollie's horrific abuse. Dr. Robinson also said that they were absolutely certain that Ollie sustained none of the identified injuries before the afternoon of Friday the 13th of October. That's 8 days before Ollie's death. And all experts actually agree that no injuries occurred before the 11th of October. They said the first serious injury was likely to have been the broken ribs, and they believe that that would have most likely occurred over the weekend of the 14th to the 15th of October. They believe that the neck injury was caused between Friday the 13th of October and Tuesday the 17th of October. Some injuries, they believe, were inflicted in the early hours of Monday the 16th of October. Bear in mind, they know that Davis that particular evening had been gaming really heavily, and just after midnight, Georgia Bolton was disturbed, in fact, by Ollie's crying that she sent a message because she was living in the house with the couple. So clearly, Ollie was very distressed enough for another adult in the premises to think, what's going on there? And that again puts Davis in the line of fire of being the person who actually injured Ollie, at least on this occasion. When Davis takes the stand, he did say, I wasn't prepared for fatherhood. And I don't think that anybody can judge him for that. It's something that many people psychologically struggle to come to terms with. It's a big deal, particularly when you're young. He's not a child, but he's young. And it can be an absolutely blindsiding experience to realize this is it, permanent. I've got a child. I'm never going to be able to forget this. I'm never going to be able to abandon this. This is my new life. And most of us go through that, and then we're happy and we realize that, yes, our life has changed beyond anything that we once knew, but it's changed invariably for the better. And we're now somebody who's got a future with a child who's going to love us more than we probably deserve at times. And we're going to dote on them and hopefully create and forge a great life with them and give them the future that they absolutely deserve. So it's not unusual for people to think, I don't know what to do. It's a struggle. I've not got a guidebook. But that's not reason to harm your child. It's not an excuse that gives you leverage to be a terrible person. A predator, a perpetrator of domestic abuse of this level, that's not about somebody being ill-prepared. That's somebody who's evil. And the reason that I'm saying that is Ollie's death didn't happen on one occasion, a loss of control. Listen, I would still find that unforgivable. But the truth is, it's very distinct. If somebody is absolutely frustrated, exhausted, they just in that moment do something terrible, slam the child against the wall. I've seen that happen in child protection cases that I've worked on, not where it's resulted in death, but where it's resulted in horrific injury to the child. And it's unforgivable, but we understand it far more than a protracted, torturous regime of abuse, because it means the person has not just lost it, they've been quite happy to take out their frustrations on a daily basis on an innocent child. And so for me, his actions are genuinely evil, and it speaks to a very malevolent and predatory mindset and emotional sense of being. Now, even though he says that he was ill-prepared for fatherhood, he is working at the time. He goes and works at Specsavers, and basically he said, I didn't want to come home from work and have to look after my kid. I was tired. Now, this was his first job that he'd ever held down, and he seemed to feel that Ollie was an imposition on him. He was an imposition on his time. So he told the jury that he would often play on his PlayStation 4 and he'd do this late into the night. He played Fortnite, he played GTA, so Gran Turismo, and he played Assassin's Creed. Also, he was known to stay up and watch the wrestling on TV instead of looking after his son. So he isn't engaging, is he? Just like he doesn't really engage in the police interviews, he's not engaging with fatherhood. He's just essentially coasting, waiting for the mother in this picture to look after her baby, and he just isn't really connected to this child. And that's a big problem, because as a parent, whilst people will take time to connect with their kids sometimes, it's not always an immediate connection, but you work hard to build that intimacy between you and your child. If you're despondent, if you're disconnected, and if you recognise that you haven't got that connection with your baby, then the love and the bond that makes you protective doesn't necessarily grow. And if ever we're going to discuss a case where that's clear, it's this one. He isn't engaging with his baby. He's not fostering that bond, and therefore there's a disconnection. And if you have a disconnection, the child that you should genuinely wish to tend to, it becomes a frustration, because they cry and need food and they take you away from what you love doing. And that seems to be what happens in this case. Now, the prosecution asked Davis about the other people in the house at the time where Ollie died. And we have to remember there's Driver's mother, Driver's stepfather, and also her half-sister. And of course, there are other visitors that will come and go. The prosecutor, Hankin, asks, do you accept the person who has done this to Ollie must be someone who has given evidence or is about to in this trial? And Davis accepts this and says, we can't rule anyone out, can we? Well, we probably can, can't we? We can probably rule out everyone apart from you and your partner, just throwing it out there. Now, even though Davis is trying to suggest that he hasn't done it, he doesn't know who has done it, but it could have been anyone, so to speak, there are people who testify about his neglect towards the baby. So Mr. Johnson testifies that on the 13th of October, Driver's other kids arrive at the address. It's an arranged visit. And Johnson actually finds Davis just gaming, and he can see that Ollie's in a pram out of sight and in another room. So this baby isn't even in the same room as the father. Davis actually refused to stop the game, even though 3 other children had arrived. So he's just completely disengaged. Now, the judge stated that this gave insight into Davis's priorities. Basically, he enjoys gaming, he enjoys being left to his own devices, and also he's quite happy to say no. He doesn't put the child first in any way, shape, or form. Now, Driver in court, well, she was described differently to Davis because she actually had 3 other children. And she basically completed a level 1 childcare at Loughborough College. She'd passed the exam. I will tell you, no disrespect if you've got a level 1 childcare. I'm not trying to be disrespectful in any way, shape or form, but you know, if it's a level 1, it's a very low achievement. It's something you're going to work through, and you're probably going to end up with your level 3 or level 4 or level 5. But level 1, it's genuinely the very bare minimal. It doesn't mean that she would be qualified in any way, shape or form to be good with children. But she has got 3 other kids. Again, you can have 3 other kids and not necessarily have come to the forefront of social services issues and still be a bad parent, but she's obviously somebody who has contact with her other children, and to some degree she will have at least some ability. But bear in mind, this is a place where she lives with 16 cats, and the house is meant to be pretty disgusting. So I'm not saying that she's somebody who actually knows how to properly take care of kids. So she tells the jury that one of the things that she knew was to check for injuries, and she considered that she was Ollie's main carer. She handled him every single day, and she's basically evidencing that she didn't notice that Ollie was in any pain. Let's be real. Every other medical expert, who I don't know, have a higher than level 1 in that particular qualification, say he would have been in agony. The fact that Driver says that she didn't notice means that she didn't care enough. And also, Davis was looking after the baby whilst he's playing in one room. The baby's kept in another room. They don't live in a castle. It's not like she's in the west wing, he's in the east wing. She would have known that he wasn't engaged with the baby. Those other children arrived and another adult notices that he's not engaged with the baby. She's choosing to just accept that this is the way things are. And so that means that she is neglectful and she is problematic as equally as Davis is. She actually went on in court to say that her only concern for Ollie's health was that he had colic, which is absolutely ludicrous when you consider what I've told you. Now, Narita Barra, she said that Driver had multiple sclerosis, that it was getting worse, that she also had clinical depression, and she had a mental age of just over 11 years. It really concerns me when a young woman with a mental age of just over 11 years has managed to have 4 children and hasn't got a huge amount of support around her from social care services. The idea that somebody is just constantly having babies and does not actually have a mental age that really can enable them to take care of those babies in a way that I think would be productive for our society, that's deeply worrying, because it means that she's highly vulnerable. And it also means that the level of care that she's expressing for her children and the level of care that she's giving to her children is probably going to be lacking. We get to the verdict. That verdict happens on the 22nd of March 2024. Davis, at this point, is found guilty of Ollie's murder, along with 2 counts of grievous bodily harm with intent, which is very, very serious. Obviously, nothing is more serious than murder, but I'm really happy that he also got the 2 counts of grievous bodily harm with intent, because that means you were intending to carry out the harm that you were giving to this particular child. You wanted to do it. Driver, she was found guilty of causing or allowing the death of a child and causing or allowing a child to suffer serious physical harm. Again, amen to that. Now, it came down to the sentencing. That sentencing was delayed until April because the court basically made allowances for Driver's disabilities. I do appreciate she has MS. I do appreciate that suddenly she can't walk and she's in a wheelchair. And I do appreciate that some of you have MS watching this and you will be in a wheelchair. And I also know that stress makes people's disabilities worse. I know if you have MS and you're highly stressed, and I imagine that she would have been highly stressed, it's going to exacerbate it because stress, coping and disease and pain all intermingle. So I am not saying that she is not having more problems with her MS. But I'm also saying that there is a possibility she is using her medical condition to try to provoke a sense of pity from those around her, to maybe get some special benefits because of her disability. She is aware that she's being seen as somebody who's contributed to a child killing, and she wants people to feel sorry for her, and her actual disability is something that she then uses to provoke that level of pity. I'm not saying it's absolute, I'm just saying to address the balance, it could be, yes, that indeed she is struggling and therefore her issues have increased. It could be that she's just trying to play the card of having problems to reduce her own sentence. We get to the sentencing. This occurs on the 10th of April 2024. And she actually turns up on a mobility scooter. And again, a lot of you will say, well, that's because she's in a terrible state. Others will say she genuinely just wants people to go easy on her. And the truth is, I don't care. I don't care whether she's in intense pain. I don't care if her disability's got worse. I don't care what she's facing, because it comes down to this. She abandoned the care of her child and he's dead. So the air she's breathing, he never got to breathe because of her. And it is because of her as well as Davis. It's not just one. She is absolutely party to this situation. Now, when it came down to Davis, for Ollie's murder, he was sentenced to life imprisonment. Unfortunately, I would say the tariff was pretty good. He got a minimum term of 22 years, which in the UK is a pretty strong sentence. And for the 2 counts of GBH combined, he got a 10-year sentence as well. Judge Cotter said this: "I have no doubt during the night you became frustrated and angry, and this led to terrible violence. You assaulted him on multiple occasions. The attacks in their various forms were also brutal, in particular the fatal neck injury." Now, Narita Barr, who is defending Driver, she asked the judge to suspend Driver's sentence completely, like just to suspend it, which would mean that she wouldn't go to prison. As long as she behaved well, she would not serve a sentence in prison. And to me, that means you're not getting sentenced at all. Now, this particular defence lawyer referred to Driver's older children who live with their father, and she said, "Kayleigh Driver presents as a very tragic figure. She's a woman of hitherto positive good character and cared for 3 children alone for 2 years. There's no evidence of those children coming to any harm. There's no punishment that would be greater than the suffering she has felt since Ollie's death. There is nothing left for this woman in life. There isn't any benefit to physical incarceration." Yes, there is. The benefit is justice. The benefit is Ollie's death meaning something. The benefit is her paying the price for being a terrible mother. I don't care that she was a good mother if she was to 3 children. And I will say, if the neighbours are right and they were living in a home that stunk and was filthy, she wasn't a good mother to those children. She's going to prison because Ollie mattered. Why is it that people struggle to get that through their heads? So what she has physical disabilities? So what that her defence lawyer doesn't believe that she'll benefit from physical incarceration because at the end of the day, she's not going to cause any more issues? She contributed to the death of her son. So now she pays the price for that. She was sentenced by the judge to 7 years in prison. The judge said, "You must have heard Ollie's cries after he was assaulted, as you were together in the bedroom. This must have woken you up." He said that Driver had shown callous indifference to Ollie's suffering by not seeking medical help, and I absolutely agree with the judge. In post-trial statements, DC Batstone stated, "Davis and Driver have evaded justice since 2017, but will now be facing a lengthy sentence for their actions." Ollie's family, who obviously are victims in this as well, the ones who did not contribute to his death, they paid tribute to our little ray of sunshine in a pre-written statement read by DC Batstone. They said that following the sentencing, they had been dragged through hell for the last 7 years with all the lies and deceit. They said on the 21st of October 2017, we were awoken to the sad news of Ollie's sudden death and concluded that it was probably a cot death, a day none of us will forget. After further examination by experts, we were horrified to find out that there were suspicious circumstances regarding Ollie's death. The police arrested Kayleigh and Michael for questioning. This shook the family to the core. Over time, the injuries were made public and we could not believe what we were being told. Ollie was perfect in every way when he was born. He had been beaten badly over time and was left to die with his injuries. This was our worst nightmare. How could anybody hurt a beautiful baby? It was beyond words. We felt sick to our stomachs, and we've shed many a tear thinking what Ollie went through in his final days. This has changed our family forever, and we suffer mentally from these evil actions. All we want is justice for Ollie, and that is the least he deserves. We would like to say a big thank you to Leicestershire Police for all their hard work and support of the family at this difficult time, and everyone involved in the case. As a family, we've been dragged through hell for nearly 7 years with all the lies and deceit. Ollie will be forever in our broken hearts, and his memory will forever live on. No sentence imposed will ever reflect the heartache and pain inflicted upon my family. As a family, we will never be able to come to terms with what happened to Ollie. We are a private family, and this trial has sadly brought about media attention we didn't want. We've struggled to write this statement as we do not want our deepest personal thoughts to be aired in public. But we know it's important for people to know how this has affected our once close family. We now ask for privacy as we try to come to terms with this devastating and chaotic period in our lives, the impact of which will remain with us forever. Understandably, the public want to know about cases like this, and I appreciate that any family are going to have to go through this horrific ordeal of having all of the dirty laundry aired publicly. But with respect to the family, the reason that we want to know this is because we find child death so abhorrent. It's so the opposite of what good people could ever do to a baby. And of course, that's going to bring attention. And of course, we want to know the details. And of course, we want to prevent these kind of things happening again. Davis's mother, Paula Wright, also gave a statement. Bear in mind, she knows that her son's going away for a minimum of 22 years. She said that Ollie had been a special little diamond and the sweetest boy you could ever meet. But she claims her son did not cause Ollie's injury. She said to the press, "I think he's innocent. He's not even got a temper on him." Now, again, for any mother to imagine that their son is capable of abusing and killing a child, it must be inconceivable for them to even believe it's possible. And I totally understand a mother's love. You believe that you know your child more than anybody else. And when somebody comes along and says, no, your child is not who you believe, your child is capable of A, B, or C, it makes sense that many mothers and fathers would say it's not true. But the extent of the reports that were done on Ollie's death indicate that he would have been present when the injuries occurred. And also, I think that what people fail to note is if a normal human being of an age of 25, for example, was injured to such a degree they looked like they'd been in an RTA, a road traffic accident, we would understand that the amount of beating and brutality that would take place would just be enormous. And it would take an individual a protracted amount of time to torture an adult in that way. Babies don't require that level of physicality. It doesn't take a great deal of force to do terrible injuries to a baby. So the fact that the mother in this case to the main perpetrator is saying, he's never been violent before, I've never seen him be violent, etc., that's because she's envisaging a monster, somebody who loudly and aggressively is harming the baby. That's not how it works. This is a man who is using his fury and frustration in a quiet and determined way to trust the baby, to harm the baby. It doesn't have to be loud and provocative. And that's the mismatch between the son that she knows and the son who really exists in this case. A man not just willing to torture a child over a period of time, but a person who's willing to murder a child and then try to say he was innocent. Now, after the death of Ollie, there was a safeguarding report and a learning briefing was actually made available by the Leicester Safeguarding Children Partnership Board after the conclusion of Davis and Driver's trial. The full serious case review wasn't actually shared because they wanted to protect the privacy of the surviving family members, but a summary of insights and also subsequent actions taken were provided through the learning briefing. The notable concerns that arose from the report included a failure to conduct birth assessments despite the involvement with children's services regarding both parents. Also, there was a lack of investigation into Davis's background. There was also delays in coordinating interventions that could potentially have actually prevented Ollie's death. Not every contact or referral made to social services about Ollie was apparently treated with sufficient care, thoroughness and gravity. And they also stated that the sharing of information between interested parties was compromised at points and on more than one occasion. The board said it's very clear that all the professionals who were working with Ollie and his family worked to help his parents to care for him and to keep him safe. They also added that more could have been done to explore vulnerability and risk for this family. The review concluded that despite acknowledging systemic shortfalls, these would not have contributed to Ollie's death. So they said that clearly more could have been done, but when they look at all the evidence, they don't think they could have prevented Ollie's death. I think if they had been involved more and they had actually been taking a very close look at this case and the individuals within it and the lack of, shall we say, ability, particularly where Davis is concerned, to be a father, maybe Ollie could have been given a more supportive environment, and maybe Davis and Driver would have recognised that they couldn't treat him in such a terrible way because social services would have been breathing down their ears, so to speak. But like always in these scenarios, very often what happens is they investigate and say, well, nothing to answer here, we did our best. But there's a baby dead. No one did their best in this case. Leicester City Council said 16 improvements were proposed after the safeguarding review and that these have been implemented since 2017. We'll have to wait and see whether Leicester Council actually does have an improvement when it comes down to child mortality after these particular things have been implemented. Today's case has been one that just blows my mind because we're talking about a 4-week-old baby. We're talking about 40 injuries. We're talking about this baby enduring the most horrific agony, and yet this happened. It happened in 2017, a few years ago. We're not living in the Middle Ages. How is it that in a civilized society, these brutal slayings continue? I'd love to know your thoughts on this case. Also, if you've got any other information on this particular case, please share it. It's one of those things that I'm always interested to hear about. And as ever, are you, like I, just getting a little bit bored of the systemic reviews coming along saying that lessons will be learned more and more and more? I hear that literally useless term. It means nothing. Lessons will be learned, which ultimately means children died. And often, children died under the very noses of those who were meant to protect them. In this case, certainly the parents, but I think services that should have done better. Let me know your thoughts, guys. This is dedicated to that beautiful little boy, Ollie. 4 weeks old. 4 weeks old. Why do these miraculous, beautiful gifts of life end up in the hands of such monstrous ogres? It just hurts my heart. See you again next time. Look after yourself, everybody.